This is where the big boys play, huh? We ain't here to play.
At the total combined weight. At the total combined weight of 589 pounds.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, at well over 500 pounds, this is where the big boys play.
All right, welcome to the show, everybody. This is At a Combined Weight. I am your host, Charlie Dudley, with my co-host, Robert McElroy. This is SoundCloud, and again, you're listening to At a Combined Weight. We're looking at the Great American Bash 1996. We've already looked at the first three 2-hour episodes of Monday Night Nitro that led us to the Great American Bash in Baltimore, Maryland. Rob, are you ready for the Great American Bash?
I am ready, man. Let's rock and roll. This is good stuff. This was actually my first ever, when I got to watch this WCW Great American Bash pay-per-view, it'd be my first WCW pay-per-view I've ever watched in its entirety. See, what they would do in the day is they would tease you with these stills. They would just show the stills from the pay-per-view, and I remember as a kid being just envious as hell of those that got to tune into it. I never was able to.
Yeah, I didn't see this actual pay-per-view live. My first ever WCW pay-per-view was Bash at the Beach 1996.
Historic.
I was only allowed to, if I behaved at school, mind you, I was only allowed to use my allowance, if you will, to purchase a pay-per-view once a month. And if I had gotten in trouble at all in that month, there went that pay-per-view. So, and naturally, the summer were the easiest pay-per-views to get because there was no school. So I didn't get in trouble in June or July because I wasn't in school. So I was able to watch the June pay-per-views, and I always saw the SummerSlam because that was, August is my birthday month. So in July, and I remember this specifically, I started watching Nitro mid-build for the Bash at the Beach, and I just had to see who the third guy was. I didn't really care about the other storylines, and so Bash at the Beach was my first pay-per-view, and we'll talk about that when we get to that point. But Great American Bash 1996 is the first time I had seen this show from start to finish. I had watched the Malenko Rey Mysterio match before, and I'd seen the Chris Benoit Kevin Sullivan match before, but prior to that, I'd only read reports and history based on the show.
The only match from this card that I'd ever seen from front to finish was the Kevin Sullivan Chris Benoit match.
Right.
That's why much of it looked familiar when I got to see it the second time.
So we open the show, Tony Schiavone, Dusty Rhodes on commentary. If you are an old school WCW fan or a WCW fan from the time, or even just somebody just listening to the show, Dusty Rhodes was the color man for WCW Saturday Night. He also is credited with inventing the concept of the Great American Bash. So he is the color man for the Bash in 96 with Tony Schiavone from Baltimore, which this event was traditionally held in Baltimore. 8 of the 12 times that this event was held under the NWA WCW banner, it was held in Baltimore. So, very traditional venue for them. The show opens with Fire and Ice, Scott Norton, and Ice Train against the Steiner Brothers. What are your thoughts on this one?
I thought it was a very, very physical match, which when you consider all of the opponents, that's what you would expect. Very reminiscent of watching two football teams that are heavy on running the football and rely on a great defense.
Right.
Which, as you know, is what the hell I prefer anyway.
Yeah,
Old school.
You love your 3 yards in a cloud of dust football.
Yes, I do. And this was that way, except not sloppy like we saw with Public Enemy and Nasty Boys, which you expect to brawl with those guys in our previous show we did previewing that episode of Nitro. No, this was the physicality without the sloppiness, and I thought it was a pretty good match for what it was and a good way to start the Great American Bash.
Yeah, I thought it was an okay match. I thought it did get kind of slow and sloppy toward the end because all the guys were blown up. They were all huffing and puffing because they weren't in like great physical cardiovascular shape. They were just like, it looked like they were just kind of walking around in certain spots. And the Steiners went so far as they changed corners mid-match. The Frankensteiner didn't look that good to me, but the Steiners get the win with the Frankensteiner that would later be called the Hurricane Rana. I'm curious to see when Mike Tenay starts calling it that, because when we watch the Malenko Mysterio match, he calls it a Frankensteiner because that's what Shivani calls it. But it's called the Hurricane Rana, but I wonder when they started calling it that.
Yeah, I was glad that they brought Mike Tenay in later on in the pay-per-view. Of course, we'll get there.
Well, the tag match opens the show, which is traditionally, if you look back at some of the older pay-per-views, they usually start with a pretty hot tag match. I know that if you look back at some of the other WWF Royal Rumbles and those type of pay-per-views, they open the show with like the Rockers versus the Orient Express, which is always a great tag team match. And then we see Mean Gene interview with Kevin Sullivan. Again, Sullivan takes a shot at Brian Pillman, talking about said he's going to do the Horsemen a favor because he's already gotten rid of Pillman and now he's going to get rid of Benoit, showing that Benoit is not worthy of being a Horseman. Thoughts on this interview? Did you care about it or move on?
Well, I was looking forward to the match, of course, even though it was the only one on the card I had seen before prior to getting to watch the whole thing for our show.
Yeah, but you kind of saw it in a bubble when you saw it initially. Now you kind of saw the build.
Yeah, which has been a lot better. No real strong opinions about that segment at all, other than the fact that it's the first time we see Mean Gene during this pay-per-view, and I have a huge man crush on Gene and always will. Up next, we have the U.S. heavyweight title on the line. El Gato makes his pay-per-view debut versus Konnan. Like I said in the previous show, I'd forgotten just how talented Konnan was. I saw some really great stuff out of him in this match. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up something that we had talked about outside of Konnan's athleticism in the last show is, remember Zbyszko's initial comment that bordered on some good old-fashioned prejudice, racism, talked about El Gato having South American boa constrictors as his fans and him being billed as a South American legend. They said David Penzer said he was from Mexico, by the way.
There's the rub. I did not catch that.
Yeah, it says El Gato's from Mexico. Another thing I wanted to point out, too, and I'll get back to El Gato in just a second, but we saw this later in the Nitro era, too, and I think that you and I had talked about this prior to us being on the show ever, in our years of friendship, is Konnan carrying out the Mexican heavyweight title. I used to love when WCW would do this, and they would bring out, the international guys bring all their belts out. I think it kind of adds, a legitimacy to that match and those characters, because if you're a WCW fan, you don't really know these international guys that would just come in for, 1 or 2 matches at a time. But if they're carrying belts, they immediately have legitimacy.
Oh, yeah.
And you can immediately see that this team is good, and this guy is good, and it kind of speaks to a little bit of an athletic mindset because it reminds me of like the NCAA tournament in basketball. A lot of these teams that come in, they don't get a lot of national pub. They don't have games on CBS or ESPN, and you rarely see any of their games. You only see them if they do well in the tournament and go farther, and then you have only kind of know who they are because they're a continual participant in the tournament. And you could say when you watch them, they're going up against Duke, who's a household name, and you're like, well, why am I even watching this? And they tell you, hey, this team has won their conference and they've won like 36 in a row and they've done this and that. And it kind of legitimizes that team. Well, and you're kind of like, okay. And that kind of same thing can be said for wrestling here is not only is Konnan the United States heavyweight champion, he's also the Mexican heavyweight champion. So it kind of gives him and WCW at the same time a little bit more of a legitimacy internationally in the kayfabe world of wrestling.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's a really nice touch. I'm very glad that the powers that be at WCW wouldn't be such egomaniacs to not allow that to happen. Yeah, I could easily see brass for Company X, whichever one you want to throw out there, who would maybe have a problem with that. But I have memory of Ultimo Dragon coming out. I guess he had been on a hiatus, and he is just covered with belts. He's got 3 or 4 of them wrapped around his waist. He has several more around each shoulder at the time.
Yeah, he had them all around his arms, and it was so cool.
It was so cool. It actually inspired me to make one of my action figures in my luchador division. I made a whole bunch of belts for him. So it's something I did with my own little stable. Here I go again about my action figures of old.
Oh, that's good though. I mean, I think that's what's good about looking back at this kind of stuff. And we're inspired by that reality as kids playing with toys and stuff.
Absolutely.
I mean, you could purchase belts, but you never purchased belts.
No, and back in my day, it was rare to get an action figure that came with belts. These days, if I see them in Walmart or Target or wherever, they come with belts, sometimes multiples, and like good looking and accurate down to the very designs. So I would color my belts. I would get some paper and, scribble a note, and just kind of like do the little outline and color it. And I spent time on these damn things, and I didn't have a laminator, so I'd Scotch tape them. But yeah.
What else did you use for belts though?
Well, you could. My dad didn't really smoke cigars, but I did notice as a kid on cigars, it would have the little paper that would wrap around the base of it. Those make for great belts, especially like you pointed out the other day, the Mexican cigars have really cool designs, and those make for badass little belts. Had my dad smoked cigars, I'd have confiscated every one of the damn things.
Yeah, they would have made for great Ultimo Dragon belts back then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like the different designs for the companies.
The match itself, I wasn't impressed with El Gato. And I was excited when I heard Konnan talk about him in the previous Nitro show leading up to this. I was not particularly impressed with him, really.
Yeah, I didn't think the match was that great either. I didn't think that El Gato was just Pat Tanaka. Earlier in the show that I just mentioned, I was talking about Orient Express. Pat Tanaka was part of Orient Express. He was also part of Bad Company with Paul Diamond back in the day. So he's an older guy, so he wasn't going to tear down the house with Konnan. Pat Tanaka had been wrestling for like 20 years at this point in 1996. He was an older guy, had a mask on. I thought that the El Gato character, like his ring gear, looked very low rent. His pants were really high. He was wearing Asics and had like thick rolled socks. They billed Pat Tanaka from Mexico, and he's actually from Hawaii. But, wrestling has been notoriously known for taking liberties with where people are from. One of the most famous, quote-unquote, Japanese wrestlers of all time was Samoan.
Absolutely. Over as hell as a Japanese guy, and I would not realize that Yokozuna was actually of Samoan descent until hell, it might have been college over there with your ass. Just to show you how over he was as a Japanese guy with me. I thought there was a really great spot with the power bomb to the outside of the ring that started on the inside of the ring. Beautiful spot, and it was so important that El Gato held on to the top of the rope for dear life while Konnan made that flip over. Otherwise, Konnan would be dead or quadriplegic. It goes to show you it takes two in this case, just like in long-form improv. Both participants have to cooperate. It was a beautifully done spot. I thought it was nice.
Yeah, it led to the finish where Konnan does a little slingshot off the top rope and then flips over into a bridge. One of the highlights for this and for the Malenko Mysterio match for me was Dusty Rhodes calling a lucha match. Yeah, I mean, Dusty infuses his Dusty-isms, if you will, into all of his all the matches that he calls. I mean, for example, the two that I wrote down, he says, "Gato mean cat, don't it? Quick as a cat right there." He says, "Got him tied up like a spider web with legs everywhere."
It was so funny throughout the entire pay-per-view, and he was saying, I knew "if you will" was something he said a lot. I didn't know it's something he said
a shitload.
Eventually, I took note. Eventually, Tony Schiavone starts saying "if you will" after stuff.
Yeah,
it rubs off on him.
Yeah,
oh, it was so funny. I love Dusty Rhodes so much during this pay-per-view.
He added so much.
Yeah, a great promo guy can lead to a great announcer. It can. So I don't know why WWE likes to take talent that couldn't even ever promo in the first place and try to make them broadcasters like they've done with Booker T and other guys.
Right. Or make them hyperbolic machines like JBL. And JBL was actually a good promo guy. And he does a good job when he stays away from his, it's the greatest ever, Michael.
Yeah, well, you and I have talked before. JBL, we feel like, or at least I feel like he thinks that's what makes great announcing by talking about how great everything is. Little does he know, it's just hyperbolic as shit.
Yeah, everything.
But Dusty Rhodes, also a very old school mind between the ears of that guy, and so he was able to keep these kayfabe elements.
Right.
And
he still had a very big hand in the booking back then, too, with WCW. Very, very big backstage during this time period. One of the things that kind of harkens back to what we talked about in the last episode with Larry Zbyszko is what happens next in this interview segment with Mean Gene and Sting. Is Gene brings up Regal being kind of prissy and a sissy. And Sting calls into question his masculinity based on the way that Regal holds his tea. And then he has this line at the end. He says, he's a little iffy, and if anyone can straighten you out, it's the Stinger.
Yeah, I took note of that.
These days
too.
they would be
so
all over WCW. They would be I mean, and the thing about it is, and people would say that, it's WCW because they're based out of Atlanta. It's a Southern product. But, I mean, Sting's from California. You know,
right.
Sting is not a Southerner. I mean, he spent a lot of time in the South with WCW, but that kind of stuff was what sold back then. I mean, if you look, like, adorable Adrian Adonis back in the 80s was a great, great heel character being very effeminate. And, you know, one of the big...
Goldust.
Yeah, one of the biggest characters in the Attitude Era was huge. Huge heel because he was trying to make, like, homoerotic passes at his opponents and stuff. And guys like Ahmed Johnson and Farouk that just were very, very homophobic in their ways toward him. And, you know, Razor Ramon, the big feud that he had with Goldust was based solely on homophobia because Goldust was kind of stalking Razor Ramon, and Razor was talking about how, like, he's oozing with machismo, and the announcers would push how, you know, this really masculine guy is being stalked by this other guy that's not very masculine. He's very effeminate, and, you know, playing up the homosexual innuendos and undertones of the Goldust character. And then, I mean, this kind of goes into the not only homophobic, but like xenophobic to be like he's foreign and he's gay.
Yeah, I didn't think it was necessary, but it's one of those
Back
things
then it was
where
the thing. I mean, it was just kind of second nature.
Absolutely. And once you bring that up and you're in a segment with Mean Gene, you're just going to kind of go with it. And I took note of how Gene at the very end, as he's throwing back to ringside, he kind of half-assed apologized. Did you notice that? He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry to bring up the sissy part," and and then that's when the camera like fades back. You see the crowd as they pan back to the ring. Yet during the entire build of Sting and Lord Steven Regal, this was the only time masculinity was ever brought into question, therefore that's what made it unnecessary to me. Well, that and it's 20 years later, we're a much more open-minded people. But this is the only time, I mean, this is like not even like, I don't know, an hour before their match. So, but I definitely made notes of all the same things. We transition into Diamond Dallas Page versus Marcus Bagwell. And I don't know, what'd you think of this match? I thought it was, just okay. Page continuing to build.
Yeah, I thought it was okay. I
rise.
didn't feel like he killed Bagwell to where he just kind of squashed him. Thought it was a decent back and forth. Pushed the Diamond Cutter. Did what we talked about with DDP. Just kind of pushing him to try to be that single star that WCW would need. Kind of one of the very few homegrown stars they were able to make during this era, and they did it with a slow build, and this is part of it.
Absolutely. I did take note of all the heel tactics. Page was healing it up during this match more than what we had seen in previous weeks. I don't know if that's because we're on a pay-per-view stage and he's trying to give it his all, given that fact, or he's trying to assert his heeldom more. But I had seen more of that from Page in this match than I had in previous weeks. And I had forgotten that when Page hit the scene as a wrestler that he was initially a heel.
Yeah, big heel. I mean, big heel. And what killed a lot of the heels in WCW was the NWO.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you weren't as big a heel as them, and it was kind of us against them mentality. And it's like, well, yeah, you're a heel, but you're not trying to kill the company. So it kind of took a lot of the heat out of the heels back then. Next on the show, match of the show, right here. Rey Mysterio, Dean Malenko, Cruiserweight title. All we had to build to this match was a vignette on Nitro. And Tenay joins Tony Schiavone, Dusty on commentary, really added to the international style, I thought. Injects his knowledge of the lucha and calling the moves and kind of educating the audience to the cruiserweight style. I thought that he always brought that kind of knowledge, and I always really enjoyed his commentary style because it was kind of educational, for lack of a better word.
Absolutely. I always loved his commentary for that reason. It took a friend of mine at the time one day to kind of point out to me, he and I were both Nitro fans, and he said, "Man, I sure do love when Tenay comes out there and does his commentary." And I had liked it, but it took a friend of mine to kind of inform me how knowledgeable he was, and he couldn't have been more correct. I agree 100% that it does help the whole international aspect of it. And this was an absolutely brilliant match. No doubt the best one on the card. Old school. If Malenko is the man of 1,000 holds, he used about 957 of them.
Yeah, he did. I mean, the first time these two have ever wrestled in WCW, Rey Mysterio's WCW debut, both of these guys, their time overlapped in ECW, and it's a bigger picture of kind of what's going on. And, I'm not going to look too deep into the match here, but looking at this match itself, you got both these guys from ECW, and it was part of that talent raid. WCW picked through a lot of ECW guys during this time period. You had Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Rey Mysterio, later Chris Jericho, Psychosis, Juventud Carrera, Public Enemy. You end up with Raven. You know, a lot of these ECW guys got picked, and this is a great example. Malenko Guerrero, they had great matches in ECW, and that's kind of what it translated over to the cruiserweight style, and this is kind of that beginning, that jumping off point, I think, for the cruiserweights as part of the undercard or the mid-card attractions for most of the WCW shows. You know, you come for the NWO storyline or to see Sting or the Giant and Luger, and you stay for the cruiserweights. You kind of see these guys kind of develop into stars because they were having great matches. I mean, Malenko, never a great promo guy. Mysterio, never a great promo guy. But good God, did they have a hell of a match. I mean, great action. Malenko working the arm. Mysterio with the high-impact lucha-type moves. Malenko gets the win, and he cheats. So, I mean, great heel stuff there. I mean, this was just a fantastic match. If you watch it in a bubble, it's no different than watching the Nitros that lead up to it. Because it just, in a bubble, it was a great match, and there was no build to it at all. It was a 2-minute vignette on Nitro during the Go Home show that kind of set the stage for these two to do battle.
I had talked a couple shows ago about how much of a perfect storm Nitro had going for it, with having Ted Turner's money to acquire all this old school talent, and how perfect of a situation that was. But I did fail to mention that while all that's happening, you have a really great mid-card developing with these cruiserweights. And it was just a great part of the show. I did not realize that Rey Mysterio in this match was 21 years old and had been wrestling since 14, so was already at it for 7 years. This guy had 7 years under his belt as a wrestler at age 21. Today, the man's 41. No wonder he's toward the end of his. I mean, he's not really. Is he officially retired now?
No, he's in Lucha Underground. Does a lot of stuff in AAA, and he's just out of the mainstream American spotlight.
Okay, but no doubt. I mean, at 41, he's a dinosaur.
Yeah, and if you read Jericho's book, his first book, Lion's Tale, he talks about meeting Rey Mysterio for the first time and thinking that he's like 12. Especially seeing him with his mask off, he looks about like he's 12. If you remember later in the WCW days, he loses his mask, and he looks so young. And I mean, the fact that he's so small kind of adds to that as well.
It was poor booking for them to.
Oh yeah.
Made him lose the mask. It took away so much from the mystique that is Mysterio. Wonderful match, 4 stars, dude. Awesome.
Great stuff here. Next up, you had Big Bubba, John Tenta. You hate to follow a great match like Malenko and Mysterio, but Big Bubba, John Tenta. The background of this, Bubba cut John Tenta's hair. Tenta was the Shark. Now he's just John Tenta. Just a brawl with two big-ass dudes, who had seen better days in their pushes. Bubba gets cocky. Tenta power slam for the win. Tenta cuts Bubba's goatee. Lets you know it's not over. The Dungeon of Doom could come back, get some more heat on Tenta. But I thought the cutting of the goatee was a nice touch for Tenta to get some of the heat back on Bubba there. Then we have Mean Gene in the back with Mongo and Kevin Green and their respective wives wearing matching jackets, which I thought was dumb of them wearing matching jackets. I thought it was fine for Kevin Green and Mongo to wear jackets like that, but their wives wearing matching jackets. And I know why it was done for, the angle that they do later, but tons of football jargon comments. We're in the huddle here, and, just countless kind of football jargon comments. Macho comes in, says that he's reinstated, cuts a promo. I mean, this is just more of what you've heard on Nitro But now you get to actually hear it from them live. Mongo's talking about how he's nuts, and
It didn't become a good segment at all until
Macho shows up.
Macho stepped
Right.
in and does what he does with Gene, which is create some pretty fun moments. But other than that, Cheese City, and I was just ready for it to be over with. That's the only that I can only say that for this build and for this match. I was ready for it to be done. No disrespect to anybody, I just was ready.
Next match on the show, Kevin Sullivan, Chris Benoit, Falls Count Anywhere. Great brawl all over the arena. Very stiff, very snug match. You have great spots in this match that look good and some that don't really look good. Not a ton of plunder to where they're going through tables and death-defying stuff. Just like a great old-school brawl.
Oh, yeah.
The bathroom stall shots look pretty good. Benoit gets one slammed on his head and then slams one on Sullivan's shoulders in the bathroom. And best line of the match is Dusty when he sees the woman in the men's bathroom. And he says, "There's a lady! There's a lady in the men's bathroom here in Baltimore."
That was funny as hell. Fantastic stuff, like you said, a great brawl all over the place. Those fans, they plant a lot of fans these days. Those were spectators. I feel like, and
because they kept getting in the way, and security had to push them out.
Security did a good job too. They really, really did a fine job with that. It's fantastic. That table, the table they used, that was the stiffest table. I don't know that Shark would have gone to the damn
No,
thing.
it was one of those thick ones like we had in the fraternity basement that you couldn't break.
Dude, that thing. But I thought that they did some cool stuff with it. I was looking forward to a table breaking, but when I saw how the table was built realistically, I thought, no, this thing. Both these guys are too Smurl Haggard to break
the superplex off the table was a nice spot.
It really was.
Benoit getting thrown down the steps, I thought was really well done. If you've been to an arena, those steps would hurt like shit to be thrown down.
Zero give whatsoever. No, those were good spots. That shot he took to the head that you mentioned from the stall door, it looked like either Cauliflower Ear or Concussion City.
Yeah, it looked terrible. Like it looked.
Oh my God!
It looked like he just died. Like his head was gonna compact. And I don't think he took the brunt of it. I think he might have put his hand up, but it looked gruesome.
He may have put his hand up. If he didn't, he got an earful, Michael. But by far as much as they did all over the arena with the steps and the table, that looked to be the most painful spot.
Yeah, no doubt.
Interestingly
enough.
No
doubt about it. It looked terrible. This speaks to, how the lack of protection for wrestlers' heads back then, for sure.
Absolutely.
Post-match, Arn Anderson comes down, teases turning on Benoit because he pulls Sullivan off of him, and then they both beat down Sullivan. Dungeon of Doom comes out to clear the Horsemen out. Good stuff here, leads to a Horseman promo in the back. Arn says Benoit has solidified his spot as a Horseman. Flair transitions into cutting a promo on Mongo and Kevin Green. Up next, you have Lord Steven Regal and Sting. Solid match, what you'd expect from these two guys. Sting does a great babyface work here, which is, reminiscent of Hogan back in the late 80s, early 90s. What you're supposed to do as a babyface is just get the shit kicked out of you the entire match, then make your comeback, then win the match. That's exactly what he did. I mean, he gets his ass kicked all match, hulks up, and then wins via submission.
Yeah, I didn't like all the hulking up.
You didn't like the hulking up?
No, as a kid, I would have loved it, and I loved everything about Hulk Hogan and guys like that who were just larger than life. I took note of how Sting was not selling any of the work hardly that Regal was doing on his arm, which I don't doubt probably frustrated Regal a little bit, or guys like Regal.
Typical babyface stuff early, though, like in that time period. I mean, they sell the overall beating, but didn't sell the arm or sell the leg, you know?
Right.
But, I mean, hulking up was, you know, I think it was a very, very traditional way of the babyface to make their comeback. I've had enough. I'm going to hulk up. Not necessarily hulking up, but I'm not fazed by that anymore. And then you hit me again. I'm not fazed. And then the expression changes on the heel, and then that's the turning point in the match. I mean, now as an adult wrestling fan, educated over the years, when you see the no selling, it kind of pisses you off. And there isn't like a spot or a move or, you know, you're coming at me and charging me, but I'm going to pull down the ropes or I'm going to just hip toss you, and that gives me a chance to catch my breath. That's a little more realistic, I guess, in the modern era rather than hulking up, you know, which is all but kind of gone away.
Right after that, we go into a very dripping of nostalgic, good cheese-tastic Bash at the Beach promo. And I love that logo they made with the little shark, you know, that comes in. God, it makes me look forward to that pay-per-view. I know we have weeks of Nitro to go through, but it already makes me excited. Very cheesy commercial. Love that a lot. And then we go into, you get Michael Buffer. I love that they commissioned Michael Buffer. Thank God for Ted Turner's money. And being able to get a guy like Michael Buffer in there that can give you that main event feel. And as a kid, I hook, line, and sinker. I used to love that. Still do watching it as an adult. It gives you that big match feel for sure.
Yeah, WCW did this all during the Nitro era, brought Buffer in to create that big match feel, that spectacle. And that's what we got to begin this, and that's kind of what the whole match was to me. It was just all about the spectacle, and it's kind of what these crossover matches have always been. It's never about a good match with great work rate. It's never going to be a scientific wrestling match. You saw Mongo did most of the work because Mongo was kind of a trained wrestler, trained under Terry Taylor, and he actually went on to have a little bit of a wrestling career in WCW, but you know, the repeated three-point stances to show that, you know, the football guys, they had the power. They had the power spots and the power part of the match under control. But the Horsemen were going to have to win it by out-wrestling them.
Or their heel.
Right, or cheating.
Exactly, which they would do plenty of. I thought once it got to that portion of the match that it became a lot more fun. You know, you have Deborah McMichael with the ladies. They go to the back.
Yeah, they leave ringside, and they're like,
decked out.
Yeah. And then she changes from the aforementioned cheesy football jackets that her and Kevin Green's wife were matching. 4 women go to the back and only 3 return. And Deborah comes back in a dress very reminiscent of the ones that woman and Elizabeth were wearing. After which, like Savage and Benoit. Savage gets involved in the match, and we see Benoit come from the back. And that kind of cues Deborah to come down with Elizabeth. She returns with a briefcase. And what does the briefcase have in it there, Rob?
Bunch of Benjamins.
Yeah, a bunch of cash and a T-shirt. Very, very WCW, NWO era nostalgia with the T-shirt. Is he going to put it on? Does he wipe his butt with it? Does he throw it into the crowd? He looks at it, turns on Kevin Green, costs the football guys the match. Mongo turns heel, joins the Horsemen. Did you notice? Did you notice the foreshadowing by Schiavone earlier? And he brings it up at the end of the match. He had talked about how Mongo left the Bears for the Packers.
Yes.
And said it was all about the money back then. He brings that up in the match and kind of glosses over it. And then he brings it back up at the end of, and he says, just like he left the Bears for the Packers for the money, he does it again for the money. Nice, like, circuitous logic by Schiavone. It shows kind of, forward planning. I like little stuff like that that as a kid and even as an adult, you might not pay attention to it in the heat of the moment if you don't know what's going to happen. And I knew going into the match what was going to happen because I had known about the Horsemen and how Mongo became a part of them, etc.
I thought it was a very nice touch for sure.
What's your thoughts on the match as a whole, the heel turn, etc.?
Very, very WCW, and a great night to be a Horseman, and a great night to be a Horseman fan. We'll discover more going forward, but this might be the best night the Horsemen have ever. As far as their WCW run goes, because it's about to get very NWO-ish, right?
Well, I'd say like the 96-97 era, this was probably a really good night for the Horsemen. Yeah, but not ever. No, not even close to ever. But in this era, yes. In the 2-hour Nitro era, maybe.
Sure, but we're not going to get a whole lot of right now they're the most respected long-running heels.
Right.
That's about to be cut. That's about to be
Well, you still have you still have the storyline of Arn kind of retiring and them adding another Horseman, and then the Horseman reunion later in the WCW era, and the Horsemen are still respected, and they're just not as they're kind of. This was a good night for them, but they helped kind of fend off the NWO a little bit, but not as they weren't as accentuated as they were in the Jim Crockett days or the early '90s for sure.
Right, and I love that Benoit was legitimized as a Horseman on this night. I thought that the WCW era of the Horsemen, it being the only one I remember as a kid that has memories of the early 90s and mid 90s, they made a nice little resurgence. I so badly want to go order that Four Horsemen T-shirt.
I had that shirt. I had that Four Horsemen shirt, and
I'm totally gonna order it.
I still have the foam 4, and it's somewhere in my storage unit or in a closet somewhere. It's with my other foam fingers, my Hulkamania foam finger and my Bret the Hitman Hart foam finger, the excellence of execution from back in the day. But I definitely did. It was purple, and it had 4 fingers. And I got the T-shirt, too. That exact T-shirt that Mongo pulled out of the Halliburton case, as they called it.
That's pretty badass. I thought Benoit was a good Horseman. I thought
he
that
was.
You and I watched the Horseman documentary one night, and I took note of the guys that were Horsemen and just didn't fit in, and the guys that were Horsemen and did fit in. And the ones that were really great Horsemen were guys that didn't mind being a part of a collective unit and didn't mind, letting somebody else have the spotlight.
Yeah, I didn't think Mongo was a very good Horseman.
Well, I didn't either.
I didn't think he fit in. I think he was more of the let's bring him in and kind of. I thought it was a very bastardized form of the Horsemen in that time, and it was very reminiscent of the whole build to this. It was we're going to have some kind of crossover appeal and mainstream pub publicity based on the fact that he's a former football player. And, Mongo's a big part of the 85 Bears, but I didn't think he fit into that mold that, we saw Flair and Arn and Ole Anderson, Tully Blanchard, and then, later with Barry Windham. And, you have Luger that's thrown in there as a horseman. Paul Roma, terrible horseman.
Sid Vicious, a wretched, probably the worst horseman.
I think Paul Roma was worse than Sid, but I loved Malenko when he gets into the horseman, but we're kind of getting off the rails here. The next segment was a live segment with Bischoff, and he brings out Hall and Nash. And Bischoff had invited Hall and Nash on Nitro previously. He said, come to the Great American Bash. I'll tell you if you can have your fight. I'll tell you if it, where it's going to be, blah, 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 blah. Brings up the answer to their fight. He announces a 6-man tag at Bash at the Beach in Daytona. So pushing the next pay-per-view at this pay-per-view, setting the stage for the WCW NWO clash at Bash at the Beach. So we know that 2 of the Invasion guys will be Hall and Nash against WCW's team. What are your thoughts on this segment before I go any further?
I liked it. I liked it a lot. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash came out to a pretty nice pop.
Oh, of course.
Which makes plenty of sense. I love how Bischoff asked them if they work for WWF.
Yeah.
I've got you on the record. We're out here in front of a capacity crowd. Do you work for WWF? He sticks the microphone in Nash's face. No. He asked Scott Hall. No. So that question has been answered. We all knew it anyway. It needed to be asked. It played into the whole angle. And I love how the F was like censored out if you watch it on the network or I guess anywhere else for that matter.
Right. And they did that because that's about the time that WWF sues them. Because they said that the WCW was perpetuating the fact that these guys still worked for WWF and they were using their characters. And then WWF counters with that with Jim Ross bringing in the fake Diesel and fake Razor. If you remember, you probably don't remember, but
I do not. Actually.
But yeah, so I thought that was good too. That he straight up asked them if they work for WWF.
And then Nash would eventually jackknife powerbomb Bischoff through that table. Good looking spot. I had forgotten about how that ever happened. That was fantastic. You get medical personnel out there, Schiavone's all pissed off.
He goes over there and
Good
checks
stuff
on him.
Usual. Yeah, oh yeah. While Dusty Rhodes kayfabes it up at the announce table, playing up the war aspect of
Dusty pushes that old school idea that hadn't been pushed yet by the other commentators. He says, hey, if they want a war, let's give them one. And he pushes that idea of like, hey, let's do that. And I think it was a change in the commentators, I think, going forward is, hey, we can stand up to these guys. And, yeah, Schiavone freaks out because Bischoff looks like he dies when he throws him through the damn table. One of the things that I noticed, 2 of the things that have stayed with me over the Nitro era, one, we've talked about how they always push something else during other matches. Another thing that stood with me over the WCW era as a fan is how the pay-per-views a lot of times were very missable for angles and storylines forwarding because they would just kind of put you off until Nitro. And Bischoff does the first instance that I remember of this happening, and when he says, well, I'm not going to tell you the 3 guys right now. I'll tell you on Nitro. And it's like, well, we've got you to spend the money, but we want you to watch Nitro too. And WCW did a lot of that where they just have screwed finishes and a DQ finish or a screwed finish, and then they'd settle it on Nitro the next night. It's like, well, why the hell did we order the pay-per-view? I mean, this.
Well, do you think a part of that though would have to do with killing WWF and the ratings was still of high priority?
Oh yeah. That was the whole.
Stick with us.
Yeah, that was the whole mentality behind it. Was that WCW put all of their emphasis on TV, and that's what has, I think, bastardized the product today. Is that so much of that emphasis has been placed on TV, and now WWF kind of had that model to where you'll see the heel get his comeuppance. You'll see storylines in and kind of a finality idea on these pay-per-views. But, WCW was like, well, thanks for joining us tonight. You'll find out more stuff that you probably could have just known right now tomorrow night on Nitro. So you'll tune in. But I thought the segment was well done. It obviously was meant to kind of solidify the invasion, solidify that these guys are not here to just be cheeky and fun. They're going to start kicking people's asses. And, announcers and referees aren't safe. Nobody's safe. And and that's what Schiavone and Dusty did a good job of pushing on commentary, was that Bischoff is not a performer. He's not a wrestler. He's an interviewer. He's on commentary. He's not trained to do this. That was uncalled for. Pushing that dastardly element that was so important to getting the NWO over.
It solidified them as problem children. And that's how I viewed them as a kid. I viewed the NWO as a problem, and that the WCW needed to get these guys out. And I would play little stories in my head of well, maybe these guys, Bischoff talked about how he had to go to Atlanta to make sure that they could even have a match with these guys. I guess that was missed on me as a kid. I used to picture these guys just getting past security. They just found a way into the arena every Monday night, and maybe they sent one of their members of NWO up to the where they're doing music, and play this is our entrance music, play this shit. I know we're not supposed to be here.
Yeah, play it.
I viewed them as these rebels that were able to fend off security and any sort of authority figure.
Which is what they want you to, is what they wanted you to think.
Right, hook, line, and sinker.
And they did a good job as the storyline progressed, kind of explaining how they were able to gain access and that kind of thing as it unfolds on who was a part of the NWO, etc. How things happen and whatnot. But yeah, this was a great next step. Always pushing the fact that you needed to tune into Nitro. Even you paid the $29.99 or however much it was. You called your local cable company, which is one of my favorite lines ever. Call your local cable company right now. And see, WCW never put the caveat in there. And I noticed that watching all these Nitros. Mean Gene, in the early WWF days, he used to say, get your parents to call, ask your parents' permission to call, and call your local cable company, because, they wanted you to get it as a kid, to get your parents' permission, not to just call them like yourself and get in trouble where they're going to have angry parents calling them, why did you tell my kid to call the cable company? And 9-year-old Robert goes and finds the Yellow Pages in Bumpkinville, Alabama, and says, can I get the Great American Bash?
I would have been up Schitt's Creek without a paddle.
You've been in so much trouble.
My brothers did do something similar once. Do you remember the lady that would pump the free Tara Reid?
Yeah, Miss Cleo.
They called her once. Got in so much damn trouble, but no, I knew good and well not to call the WCW hotline.
Yeah, we haven't even gotten to that.
Your ass.
We haven't gotten to that era yet, where Mean Gene was giving away trade secrets in the back, and I've got backstage rumors. Call at 1-900-909-9900.
You remember the number. I love it. As if that's not a good enough end to a pay-per-view, we get the world title match.
Yeah, I was not a fan of this match. I thought it was kind of, they should have just ended the show with the Hall and Nash segment.
Kind of anticlimactic.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, Luger and the Giant, never known for their in-ring acumen. And I thought that the one little thing that I really liked, and I'm a big fan of little things, as you'll probably pick up on if you're a regular listener. I really, really like the little bitty things that people do in the wrestling business that kind of sell the realism or the little things that kind of make things tick. And Luger comes out, and he's about to fight for the WCW World Heavyweight title. Okay? And he stops to check on Bischoff.
Yes. Loved it.
It lets you know this shit is real. This wasn't supposed to happen. We work together. This is one of my colleagues. I'm going to stop and check on him. But, I mean, I still have business to take care of, but kind of speaks to the entertainment aspect of, like, the show must go on, and I still have a job to do, but it has a human and babyface element to it to where he does go and check on Bischoff. I thought it was really, really, like, subtly a little thing that just kind of pushes what is good about old school wrestling and what can be good about wrestling in general.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. I loved that a lot. And the announcers played into it as well. They acknowledged how Luger, he's got a job to do here. He has 2 titles around his waist trying to get the third and most important one. But he just saw his colleague get jackknifed through a table. He could be off his game a little bit. I thought Dusty in particular did such a good job selling that. The only good spot I liked was the Giant being up on the turnbuckle, opening up a very opportune moment for Luger to put him in the rack, which he would attempt to do to no avail. Only spot I liked, and then just a really good-looking choke slam in the middle of the ring, and with no ropes around him to hold on to, you knew that was it. I like that Giant went over clean.
Yeah, and it kind of built to the fact that, they're building the Giant to be this monster. One thing that really annoyed me about the match is how loud Luger yells during his offense and his selling. Like, every time he got hit or did the hitting, he would be like, oh! Oh!
Oh, he would yell to the top of his lungs.
It was so loud. So loud. Like he was dying every time.
You know whose screaming I liked was Woman's.
Yeah.
She was selling that she was concerned for her men.
Yeah.
So while I appreciated it coming from her, from Luger, it was a little much.
Yeah, it was a bit much for Luger for sure. But yeah, and I thought the kind of end of the show, Giant pins him, and then that's it. He just walks out with like no fanfare or anything. And they're like, all right, that's the end of the show.
Do you think it's because the most climactic point of the pay-per-view was them seeing Bischoff?
Yes, no doubt.
Get messed with? I mean, they made such a big deal during the Attitude Era, or I guess kind of the beginning of it, when it's the first time they ever see Vince McMahon have any one of his wrestlers have anybody put his hands on him, with Stone Cold Steve Austin stunning him. Well, this is the first time in WCW you see Eric Bischoff get messed with.
Well, and see, Bischoff, it wasn't really known that Bischoff had that much power at this time, like mainstream-wise. But, I mean, backstage, or if you're a smart fan, you knew that. But to the regular audience member, Shivani and Mean Gene and all them, they were just like Bischoff, just a commentator.
Right.
I don't know. I just thought that, it just kind of, they didn't have the Giant like standing over him with the belt or anything. It just kind of was a very anticlimactic, like, we'll see you tomorrow night, and we're going to push the shit out of this invasion angle.
And it would have been stupid booking to give Luger his third title.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he already had the TV title and the tag titles with Sting. it definitely would have been stupid booking unless you're trying to make Luger like the face of the company. But Luger had already been with the company for a long time, and he had already had his kind of mega push being back in the company when he showed up on the first Nitro unannounced. When a lot of people didn't know that he had signed back with WCW. After he had been the big part of that mid '90s push, '94, '95, the Lex Express. In WWF.
Yeah, I didn't notice any sort of pop from the crowd for the Giant or Luger, and I wonder how many in that crowd actually believe that Luger was a real threat to the title.
I mean, I think if anybody's going to be a threat to the title, it's going to be Luger. But I think at that point they might have been just kind of tired. The crowds in WCW never really were that hot for anything until later. They would get hot for like a lot of the NWO stuff because, I mean, the crowd got hot a little bit for the Malenko Mysterio, but that was pretty much it. I mean, they didn't get hot for the Horseman stuff. I mean, they weren't really like a hot crowd, and Baltimore was a good crowd in those early Great American Bash. They were all over the place. They were a loud, rambunctious crowd when, you're having Steamboat and Flair back in the day.
Yeah, pretty good pop to Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, but like that, just you can only point to just a few times where that Baltimore WCW crowd was really, really hot.
Well, that's going to wrap up the Great American Bash. You have any closing thoughts or musings heading into the next Nitro?
It has me looking forward to the next Nitro a lot as this invasion continues to build and build. Shoot us all a follow on social media, being_large for both Twitter and Instagram. That's about all I got.
I don't have Instagram, so don't go looking for me. I don't post pictures or anything. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's NoBozos2. But I really want to thank you for sticking with us. This is our 4th episode. We'll be back with our next episode of Nitro that will start the build to the Bash at the Beach. Looking forward to taking this walk down memory lane with you in the summer of '96, as is now 20 years ago. Looking back at the invasion of NWO, still have not called them the Outsiders, Hall and Nash. No names have been given to them yet. So I think that adds to kind of the story going forward. But thanks for clicking the link that brought you here on SoundCloud. And you have been listening to At a Combined Weight for Robert McElroy. I am Charlie Dudley. We'll see you next time.